Thank you for joining this panel today. We're talking about writing asexual and aromantic characters. I'm joined with two amazing authors. Would you be able to introduce yourselves? JR, could you start?
Sure. My name is J.R. Hart, and I have written and published two books, This Christmas and Splash, with Nine Star Press, and I have a sequel coming out in May and another new release coming out in December. And in addition to writing, I am also a coffee fiend, and I also happen to be asexual.
My name is Lauren E.E. Persons, and I work on NASA's Artemis program to send humans back to the moon by the end of the decade, and I also enjoy writing quirky and queer middle grade fiction by night. So apart from helping out with Write Hive, I'm a Write Mentor 2020 mentee alumni, and Author Mentor Match 2021 mentee, and Write Mentor 2021 mentor. And apart from helping out with all of those things, I'm also identify as asexual panromantic.
What is the difference between asexual and aromantic?
So people tend to only or mostly talk about sexual orientation when it comes to identity, but sexual orientation is only one half of the attraction coin, and the other being romantic orientation. These are often glossed over because for the majority of the population, their sexual and romantic orientation are the same. However, the difference is pretty simple. Sexual orientation refers to who you are sexually attracted to, where romantic orientation refers to who you are romantically attracted to. So, for instance, you might have someone who is heterosexual and heteroromantic. This means that they are both sexually attracted to and romantically attracted to the opposite sex, which happens to be the default for the majority of the population. But you don't have to have the same orientation for sexual and romantic attraction. You have someone who is bisexual, sexually attracted to both sexes, but who is homoromantic, only romantically attracted to the same sex. For the case of asexual and aromantic, it's a case of someone not being sexually or romantically attracted to someone else, respectively. It's important to point out that these two orientations do not necessarily go hand in hand. You could have someone who is both asexual, and we also call this ace in the community, or aromantic, which we also call aro. People are often one, but not necessarily both. So, for instance, I am asexual, which means I do not experience sexual attraction to anyone, but I'm panromantic, meaning that I am interested in romantic relationships regardless of the individual's gender identity. That said, being aromantic or asexual does not look the same for everyone. Some asexuals can be sex repulsed, meaning they don't ever want to have sex, while others might feel neutral about the subject. So one case of being asexual or aromantic does not represent what all asexual or aromantic people experience.
For me, in my own personal experience, as I mentioned, I am asexual. I would not describe myself as aromantic. So when I'm writing an asexual character or when I'm referring to myself, I don't experience any sexual attraction, but I do experience romantic attraction. So a lot of times when I'm writing an asexual character, the same thing happens with my character, and that when they see someone, they don't ever have the impulse to be sexually intimate, but they still want all of the romantic trappings that come with it. So the dating, the hand-holding, kind of the just spending time with someone in those romantic things that come along with it, those are all still on the table. But sexual intimacy isn't really something that comes to mind. Not that it's something that isn't possible for someone who's asexual, but something that isn't at the forefront, basically.
What are some examples that you feel are good examples out there, whether it's a book, television show, movie, or just a story that portray asexual and aromantic characters correctly?
I would say one of my favorite pop culture references, it never explicitly states the character is aromantic and asexual, but it does very much show that he is, and that would be Abed from Community.
That is very.
I mean, just the portrayal of Abed in general resonated so much with me as someone who is asexual, but also someone who's neurodivergent. But his character was just so well crafted in so many ways, and I felt like he was such positive representation for asexuals and in a lot of ways aromantics too. And every time I see his character, it just makes me smile, because I think about, you know, all of the ways that there's an episode in particular where his friends are trying to get him to go on a date with this girl, and they're plotting this different way where they need to change him into kind of the perfect date for her, like the perfect date for her. And so he does all these things to try to change. And spoiler alert, at the end, they're kind of like, well, why would you change if you weren't interested? And he goes, well, because it was something that mattered to you guys. It didn't matter to me if she was interested in me. It mattered to you guys, so I tried to do that for you, but it didn't matter to me. And so it was kind of an experience that I've kind of gone through, that sometimes in the process of trying to like fit in with your social group or your peers, you'll try to change, like, okay, well, you know, maybe I will try to date this person, or maybe I will try to be with this person, because that's an experience I feel like I should be having, but it's not necessarily one that is particularly important to you as a person, you know?
So I love the idea of viewing Abed as asexual and or aromantic. That honestly never occurred to me before, but now looking back in hindsight, I can totally see it. And Abed was also one of my favorite characters, so that makes me smile. That's totally wonderful. For me, I guess I'll talk about Todd from BoJack Horseman. If you guys haven't seen that, it's a pretty wonderful show. And Todd is honestly one of the best examples I've seen of asexual representation in media. And he pretty much subverts every asexual stereotype that I've ever seen. The show is explicit about his asexuality. And in fact, for one whole season, and I'm not going to give you guys spoilers here, but for a whole season, it explores his sexuality. It goes from him being kind of in denial and feeling uncomfortable with the label, to eventually embracing it, to eventually finding other people who are also asexual and having conversations with them and learning about the identity. And honestly, it's just a really good, positive representation of asexuality and the nuances of those conversations, and how you can feel learning you are asexual or trying to come to terms with that. And later in the season, he even develops an asexual dating app. And when he did that in the show, I like kind of had to pause, and I was like, does this exist in real life? Like, is there an asexual dating app? Can somebody get on that? So yeah, Todd from BoJack Horseman is a wonderful example of asexual representation in modern media.
Do you have any other, just out of curiosity, any other examples of a well-written aromantic or asexual character?
I do. I'm actually still in the midst of reading it, but so far I'm reading Let's Talk About Love by Claire Kahn. And it features an asexual character named Alice, and genuinely in the very first chapter, it starts off with her girlfriend breaking up with her because she isn't comfortable having sex with her. And in her head, she knows she's asexual, but she's not ready to come out as asexual to her girlfriend. And so her girlfriend fears that she won't ever love her enough. And so the story is a lot of her coming to terms with her asexuality, and how that doesn't mean that she can't love someone enough just because she doesn't have the desire to be sexually intimate with them. And I also do like that in that book, she does actually have sex with her girlfriend, but it's framed in a way that the girlfriend is upset because it's more about her and less about like Alice never initiates or never wants it. And I think a lot of times there's this misconception that asexuals never have sex. And so to have an explicit on the page character that says, yes, I am asexual. No, I don't want to initiate sex, but I will do this if it's important to my partner. But at the same time, it's not something that's important to me. I think that's really well done. And I think it's a really compelling story then for her to kind of embrace that aspect of herself and of her sexuality to say, yes, I'm asexual. And then another one is, and this is more of a side character, but in the YA novel, Full Disclosure by Cameron Garrett, there's also a young adult side character in that novel who is on the page very clearly asexual, who's very well written.
Yeah, so JR's example I have heard a lot about. Let's Talk About Love, and honestly, it sounds wonderful, and it's definitely on my TBR list. So for the other side of the coin, I'll recommend The Trouble by Daria Defour, which is a contemporary romance that features an aromantic gay main character. And there are multiple scenes in it that explicitly discuss Danny's aromanticism between him and his partner, and it's done in a way that doesn't present his aromanticism to be a problem to be solved. Rather, it's just simply an aspect of their relationship. So if you're looking for a book that has really good positive aromantic representation, then I'm going to suggest that you guys check out The Trouble.
The best place to start for writing is an asexual, aromantic character is what not to do. So what are some cliches and stereotypes that we should avoid when writing asexual or aromantic characters?
I would say the biggest issue I see with Ace or Arrow characters is that they're treated in some shape or form as either broken or inhuman. So either the character is an alien or a robot, something which doesn't have a sex drive or is incapable of sex, or the character is shown to be asexual because they had some traumatic experience which has turned them off of sexual encounters. And this is obviously problematic because being asexual or aromantic is how you are born. It's not caused by trauma. It's not something that's broken about you or that can or needs to be fixed. And similarly, not experiencing sexual or romantic attraction doesn't make you inhuman, so we need to stop otherizing these characters. I think a writer should think really hard about making your character Ace or Arrow due to them being totally alien or having a traumatic past. I just don't think that's the way you want to go with this because it sends the wrong message. And along these same lines, there's a trend where characters who are asexual or aromantic are not neurotypical. There's absolutely people out there who are both Ace and Arrow and autistic, but it's a disservice to always and only present these two identities hand in hand. Being autistic does not mean that you are incapable of sex or romantic relationships. And similarly, being interested in sexual or romantic relationships does not make you autistic. So while it's fine to have neurodiverse characters that are also Ace or Arrow, make sure that that's not the only representation you're depicting. I've also seen Ace or Arrow characters presented as the villains a lot of the time, and it doesn't send a great message when all of your characters who are uninterested in romance and or sex are shown to be evil masterminds. Abstaining from relationships does not somehow make you incapable of empathy, and it's not going to grant you super intelligence.
Yeah, I kind of wish it worked in some kind of mastermind way because I feel like I would have something more interesting about me than like a really cool Animal Crossing island. Like, I wish I would have more to show for the fact that I don't have any than that, but I don't. But that is the reality of it is, yeah, you don't become some kind of mastermind or you don't become some kind of like mega overlord because you're not sexually active.
I personally study the history of pop culture and how it relates to the world around it. And it seems like media or Hollywood's default reaction to something that they don't understand is to villainize it.
Yes.
And I mean, we saw that in the 90s, I believe it was, with things like Silence of the Lambs, which did come from a book, which I think was written in the 80s, but there was like a trend of let's make the villain transgender.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad that we our society kind of defaults to that first, but it's great that there are people who are writing positive portrayals to hopefully stop those negatives from coming out or continuing to be perpetuated.
Well, and I think that's something that genuinely causes a lot of harm and fear to this day, because I know, like, as someone who has family members who still have some transphobia, some of that is rooted in pop culture portrayals of trans characters. And so to have that same kind of villainized portrayal of asexual or aromantic people, it's doing the exact same thing down the line to people who are asexual or aromantic. And that's genuinely something that can be very dangerous.
Do you have any suggestions for writing asexual or aromantic characters when you're not in that demographic?
I think if you're going to include an asexual or aromantic character, the best way to do it is to realize that they can still live a very full life with a very full family. Because a lot of times asexual portrayals are like, well, this person, you know, is the sad aunt that lives alone or something like that. You know, as an asexual, like, I have a child and I have a family and everything. And so, like, there is a lot of erasure of, like, asexuals or aromantics who genuinely build up a community and sometimes even have children. So there's a lot of experiences that asexual people can have that are sometimes limited, because a lot of times non-asexuals will look at them and go, okay, all asexuals are a monolith. None of them ever have these experiences. They will always be alone. And that's not always the case. There are a lot of asexuals who can have fulfilling romantic relationships. There are a lot of aromantic people who can have fulfilling sexual relationships. There are a lot of people who fall somewhere else on the asexual or aromantic spectrum, where they're like demisexual or demi-romantic, or because that is something that is a spectrum, kind of like gender as a spectrum or sexuality as a spectrum. Asexuality and aromanticism are a spectrum. And so I think the best thing to say to someone who is not asexual or not aromantic, who wants to write a character who is asexual or is aromantic, is to write that character the way that they would any other character, in that that character is an individual and that character is not a monolith. Like, it's not representative of all asexuals and all aromantics. And it, like, that character, they will have their own experiences and their own needs and their own life and their own family and their own background that needs addressing.
I absolutely agree with everything JR said. Diversity in representation is very important. Asexuals can be sex repulsed, but you can also have asexuals that enjoy sex. And I know many, many asexuals that have children. Romantic people can also be in emotionally intimate relationships, so you shouldn't just depict them as unfeeling sex machines. Libido is also an angle to consider because it's entirely separate from sexuality and romanticism. You could have an Acer arrow character both with high libidos or non-existent ones. The important thing is not to portray them all the same as one identity and to make sure that you're writing with nuance. These need to be fully fleshed out people first, because their sexual or romantic or before their sexual or romantic identity. I'd also like to add, of course, if you're not of this demographic, make sure that when you're writing these characters, you're talking to people who are. So get some sensitivity readers. talk to your friends who might be of this demographic, revisit the harmful tropes that we just mentioned earlier. Really just make sure you're lifting up this demographic and not continuing to perpetuate harmful misconceptions. And really that goes for the demographic you're not a part of.
So it seems like, and I'm not trying to boil what you all said down, but I'm going to try to boil what you all said down, is that we need writers and humans in general need to stop thinking of people as labels and start thinking of them as people.
Absolutely. I mean, having asexual and aromantic rep is important, but to have an idea that all of that rep would kind of appear the same way is kind of the same way that you would think that, like, okay, I'm going to write a story about a gay man and every gay man I write is going to be the exact same person. Or I'm going to write a story about a trans woman and every trans woman I write is going to be the exact same type of person. Every asexual and aromantic person has different experiences and different priorities. And for some of them, having a relationship is a priority. For some of them, it's not. For some of them, having a sexual relationship is something they would be willing to do because it's important to their partner. For some of them, it's something that they would be willing to do because it's something that they're okay with and they're not repulsed by, so they'll do it. For some people, it's something that they would be absolutely not interested in any way, shape, or form. So realistically, there are many different ways to be asexual or aromantic, just like there are many different ways to be literally any other kind of person on the planet. And so you just have to make sure that when you're writing those characters, you're making them as diverse as any other characters you write and not making them kind of like a flat one panel character that's just like, okay, well, this person's ace, so this is exactly how they're going to be.
So, do you have any tips for how to portray ace or aro characters when sex or relationships are not present in the story or when they're just a minor plot point?
Yeah, great question. I myself don't tend to write a lot of romance in my books, and I definitely don't ever write anything explicit. So I do kind of deal with this often. And I think it can be approached the same way that you'd casually show a character is gay or bi or some such. The characters might be talking about attractiveness or someone, or the ace character could like make a joking comment about not relating to the conversation. Or your aromantic character can be mentioned as having a partner, but making it very clear that they're only interested in friends with benefits. I think all these would be easier to show the point of view character, so you can use their internals to react to what the others are saying. But it's totally doable by bringing up related topics very briefly in conversations and just having characters make a one or two offline just comment about the subject.
I think that's a really excellent point on how to bring it up. I think it could also kind of easily come up in conversation. So say main character is ace and they're talking to their best friend. Best friend says something off the cuff about, oh, this is what I was doing last night. And main character is like, glad I don't have to worry about doing that. And kind of makes it clear that that's something that's not a part of their life. And maybe even is on the page, you know, I'm asexual, that doesn't appeal to me. Or their best friend is like, yeah, ace people privilege or something, like makes a joke out of it kind of. And so it's very clear that the character is asexual, but you really don't have to dig into it any deeper there if it's not a romance and still get that representation. But there's also a lot of ways that, like, if it were to be a romance, you could have an asexual person that is not aromantic and have a romance. You could have have characters that are aromantic and that are not asexual and have a very erotic piece of work that doesn't result in any romance. So there are a lot of different ways that something like that could be covered in a book, romance or not romance.
Do you have any tips on how to include this type of representation in younger fiction, such as middle grade or lower YA?
I don't have any experience writing middle grade and not much experience writing YA, but I will say the book that I would love to see in the world is a YA novel that speaks to asexuality and aromanticism, where the main character knows they're kind of like different in that way, and they know that maybe everyone else around them is kind of like, oh, well, this is what we're doing, and trying to fit in while also staying true to themselves and knowing that that's not something that's important to them. Because I feel like we have so many representations of teenagers in media. You know, you have all these discussions about like TV shows like Euphoria and Good Trouble and all of this, where the teenagers in these shows are going out and getting high and having sex every single weekend. And there are a lot of books that are really sex positive, and that's a fantastic thing for the teenagers who need a sex positive story or something like that. But I feel like there is so little out there for teenagers navigating the water of going, I'm in this group and everyone around me seems to be having sex, seems to be kissing and getting closer and doing these things, and I have no desire to. Where does that leave me? And I would love to see someone tackle that in a really respectful way that concludes with the character saying, hey, I think I actually am asexual, and staying true to that and staying true to themselves. I think that would be really cool, and I really hope that someone does that.
Could that be a potential book for your future?
Possibly.
So I love JR's response there, and I think she has a great answer about showing a variety in depictions of how sex is displayed in fiction, especially in YA. And when I was researching for this panel, I tried to find lists of asexual and aromantic characters written by asexual and aromantic authors, and I was able to come up with 13 young adult books, 5 new adult books, and 12 adult books. Many of these were written by the same author as well. And none of them were middle grade. So I think this is definitely a niche that's waiting to be filled. And I can also see why people would be hesitant to tackle these topics in middle grade, because it sort of necessitates bringing up the topic of sex, which many probably wouldn't be comfortable with in kids' books. But the reality is that the majority of girls who are reading upper middle grade and lower YA books have already had their first period. Boys and girls are going through puberty at this time, and it's kind of absurd to me to shield them from the idea of sexuality in these age groups, considering most of these kids have already had 1 or 2 sex ed classes. These topics are very relevant to what preteens are experiencing, so I think the idea that it's taboo for this age group just seems reactionary to me. So do I think we need to include this representation in younger writing? Yes, absolutely. I got a little sidetracked there, so moving it back towards the question at hand, I think asexuality and aromanticism are going to have a lot of overlap in these age groups, but could very easily be included in a lot of middle grade novels. Definitely experienced these feelings when I was a kid, without knowing or understanding what they were. When friends talked about crushes, I just couldn't relate. I didn't understand how you could be attracted to someone just based on looks without getting to know them and developing a friendship with them first. So one option to show this representation in kids' books is showing the kids not relating to their friends who are developing crushes and want to go on dates and be in relationships. And maybe you could do a group of characters having a sleepover and they're talking about sex or sexuality, and the ace or arrow character just kind of feels uncomfortable or struggling to relate to what their peers are saying. They just don't get it when their friends talk about how hot someone is, for instance. Or maybe they do agree that the character is hot, but they don't really have any urge to go on dates with someone or to develop a romantic relationship like their friends are. So first crushes are really common tropes in middle grade, and what happens when the main character is being crushed on but realizes that they can't reciprocate. I think there's a lot of different approaches that you can take with this.
Is there anything we haven't touched upon that you feel is important for writers or readers to know?
I think we've had a really good conversation here today. So just as one last thought, anyone wanting to learn more or write about this representation, I'd love to recommend the Asexuality, Visibility, and Education Network. It's an online resource you can use both to learn more, but it also, you can get different and various accounts or firsthand accounts of what it means or feels like to be asexual from people writing about their own experiences. There's also ARIA, which is the Aromantic Spectrum Union for Recognition, Education, and Advocacy. And I would highly recommend both of these resources if you want to learn more. So go ahead and check those out.
But all of those are very excellent resources if you're writing an asexual or even an aromantic character, because I know, especially the last one, the Asexuality, Visibility, Education Network does touch on aromanticism. I know also the HRC website and the Trevor Project also have some more like articles on their websites that have like more definitions and just kind of short briefs about what those sexualities and romantic attractions and things like that are. And so that can help someone when they're kind of trying to get the feel of a specific sexual or romantic orientation when writing. And that can be a really good starting place for that research.
Awesome. Anything else that you'd like to share out to the community?
This might be an obvious one, but asexual and aromantic characters are not broken and they don't need to be fixed. And
good point.
Sex or romance is going to fix your aromantic or asexual person or character. So if your whole plot is, I'm going to take this aromantic character and woo them with a whole bunch of dates and flowers and over-the-top gestures, and suddenly that's not going to work. If they're an aromantic person, they will always be aromantic.
Yeah, I think JR summed it up perfectly. Never forget to write with nuance and empathy. So, Frank, thanks so much for hosting this panel. You've been an awesome mod.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.